This week on Season 1, Episode 5 of Technicolor Blood, the First Man controversy that's kicking up around Hollywood, and Hollywood loses a legend. Burt Reynolds dies at 82.
We're also going to be discussing Die Hard 6, and guess what? New movies based on toys.
Stick around, guys. Technicolor Blood starts right now. Technicolor Blood, people. Thanks for joining us again. My name's Chris. I'm here with Terrence again. How you doing, Terrence?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. Hi, everybody.
All right, so let's just get going here. First one out of the gate, more controversy about a movie. Now, this one I think is a little bit different, and I think a little bit self-caused. So we discussed before the trailer for First Man, the movie coming out starring Ryan Gosling playing Neil Armstrong. And the controversy that kicked up this week is apparently, despite the importance and the significance of the event in Neil Armstrong's life, in a movie about his life, at least partially about his life, the filmmakers omitted the scene where Neil Armstrong plants the American flag on the moon. So some people got hold of this news, of this information, and obviously it's 2018, so it became political. And I don't know if this defense is on behalf of the entire film crew or if it's just Ryan Gosling speaking for himself, but apparently the retort, which I think sort of made the controversy worse, is that the filmmakers look at that as a human achievement and not an American achievement. I still don't see why that means you omit it from the film, but this has become now the latest controversy, which still is sort of under the surface a little bit. And I think I'll just throw it out there why. I don't think it's a bigger deal yet because Trump hasn't tweeted about it yet. But in this age of kneeling during the national anthem and the Colin Kaepernick controversy and all that, I feel like it's just a matter of time before this now becomes a big deal.
Listen, I get that we live in a world where everything is politicized, but I honestly can't bring myself to care about this. I mean, on the grand scope of the story they're telling, including or not including a scene of somebody putting the American flag in the ground on the moon is just so minor to the actual story.
Yeah, but I mean, it is a big moment in Neil Armstrong's life on his, in the context of his life. So not knowing yet how much about the story is just about his life and a sort of biopic versus the other events surrounding. I mean, unless you know the full context of the film, I really won't have an opinion on this until I see it. But I just think it's interesting that once again, just something related, not even really related to politics, got swept up and is now, again, it's not a big deal yet, but I feel like any day now it's going to become a big deal because, Hollywood is a favorite punching bag of the president, regardless of how you feel about him.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. I just, again, personally, here's a character who left the surface of the planet and set foot on the surface of the moon. Everything else in that movie is just icing around that event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess I'll ask this question: Do you think it's good publicity or bad publicity? Do you think there's any such thing as bad publicity for something like this?
I do think there is actually bad publicity, but in this case, it's probably not that because really, I mean, outside of people who are keeping a tab on upcoming movies, who even knows this movie exists?
Right?
I mean,
yeah,
it's a biopic. So.
That's why I think it's just a fringe element right now. But the movie hasn't come out yet, so we'll see in October when that hits theaters. So another big story this week. Hollywood lost an iconic legend. Burt Reynolds passed away at the age of 82. I think movie fans of a certain age obviously appreciate him a lot more. Newer fans, not as familiar with his work, but he's done a lot of sort of timeless films that I think would appeal to young folks too, if they would only give it a shot. Now, none of them are superhero movies, but I figure we would talk for a few minutes on Burt Reynolds and kind of give him and his career some credit here because he was. I don't think he was regarded as a great, historically great actor, but he's a historic, iconic personality in Hollywood for sure.
Yeah, no question there. And I mean, I think the real important takeaway from his career is that throughout the entire decade of the 1970s, he was the biggest box office draw in the world.
Yeah, and as we'll talk about in a few minutes, he apparently had a lot of choices, a lot of very interesting choices that he turned down. Not all of them are confirmed. Some of them are more rumors. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I guess a good place to start is what was your favorite role that he starred in, and maybe what was your favorite movie he was in? Maybe they're the same. Maybe they're not.
So in my case, I'm from the age where I remember when he was in movies, and saw a few of those when I was a kid, mostly past their run in theaters. I was probably too young to see them initially in their theatrical releases. So, I kind of grew up with him in movies like Smokey and the Bandit and Cannonball Run and things like that. Mm-hmm. And those were all fine, and those were all super entertaining. And clearly those are the films that made him the household name that he was at that time. But probably like most people from today, my favorite role of his is his role from Boogie Nights. That was him actually getting the chance to act as opposed to just being the Burt Reynolds personality.
Yeah, as a kid, I want to say for some reason, this changed as I got older, but when I was a kid, the thing that I remembered Burt Reynolds from the most was actually the post-credits scenes of Cannonball Run, where they would do the, right. the outtakes with he and Dom DeLuise. Right. And I just remember he has one of those iconic distinct laughs that it's contagious and makes you want to laugh too. And those outtakes from Cannonball Run were I don't know how well they hold up now because I haven't seen it in a while, but it used to make me laugh hysterically even as a kid. And I didn't even know what the hell they were laughing about.
For sure. Yeah.
But just the sound of those two doing their thing just made me laugh.
Right. For me as a kid, it was definitely Smokey and the Bandit. I just, his easygoing charm and, comic wit. And I've noticed a lot of the tributes to him reference his cool. And sure. I mean, there's definitely just a laid back Southern cool about him that is undeniable. And I think that comes through in almost every role he played in the 70s.
He's one of those guys where, like I said, I don't think he really gets enough credit as an actual actor, but he's definitely one of those guys that can sit on camera and not say anything, and you're just enthralled by his presence.
Absolutely.
Just from a look or a smirk, or depending on the type of role he's playing, if he's if he's a jerk in the role, if he's if he's just like a sort of a playboy character, any of those type of roles, he can get across his character without saying anything.
Right. He's got that style that very few actors can master, where everything seems effortless to him. He's just relaxed, and he's got that twinkle in his eye, and it's just exudes confidence as a performer, and it comes across in every role he plays. And before we get too far down this conversation of his acting, we should also bring up his performance in Deliverance, which is sure. highly overrated because, of course, everyone remembers only one scene from that movie.
Yes,
but it's actually a really strong movie, and his performance is really excellent.
Yeah, and also I just want to, before we go too much further, apologies if I sort of mixed up Cannonball Run and Smokey and the Bandit there. That just kind of got mixed in my head a little bit.
No, you got it right.
Okay, good. But I'm glad you brought up Deliverance. I was going to bring that one up because obviously we're movie guys, but I'm sure we both have a couple of titles that we just never got around to seeing mm-hmm. that are real famous. For me, one of them is Deliverance. I saw it for the first time only maybe 2 years ago.
Right.
So I'd never seen it before, and yeah, I mean, going into it, everyone already knows about the famous scene. But yeah, he was really good in that, and that was a tight little movie from the 70s that I think gets sort of swept under the rug because the 70s obviously were one of maybe the greatest decade in the history of film.
Right.
So that one kind of gets cast aside, but
yeah, and in that he's much more of a character and not just the Burt Reynolds persona.
Right. Yeah.
So I see why people forget about it. I can't even remember for sure. Does he have his trademark mustache in that film?
I can't remember now.
I know his hair is a lot shorter than it is in almost everything else he's done since.
I seem to remember him being shirtless in that movie, or at least maybe wearing a vest with no shirt under.
Yeah,
or something.
Yeah. He's brought his tickets to the gun show in that film for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I think didn't he like pose nude in the 70s too? Like he was like Playgirl or something?
Yeah, well, yes. There's that super famous photo of him lying on a bearskin rug.
Right, yes.
Yeah, recently parodied by Ryan Reynolds in the Deadpool costume.
Right, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah, so you brought up Boogie Nights. For me, the best movie he was in, and I think off the top of my head was probably Boogie Nights, but that role just sort of relaunched his career in sort of the same way that, you know, Tarantino did for John Travolta in Pulp Fiction. But you had some interesting information I didn't know about Burt Reynolds and Boogie Nights. Why don't you share that with us?
Oh yeah, so this is kind of legendary about this role. Is he turned it down 7 times before he agreed to do it, and I just think that's kind of amazing. You know, he's sort of famous for turning down roles. A lot of them went on to be career makers for other performers. And here is this film that is his only Oscar nomination. It's, you know, arguably his best performance. And the filmmakers had to work really hard to get him to agree to it. And, you know, famously, even after being nominated for the Oscar, he never watched the film. He's never seen the actual film that he was nominated for an Oscar for.
That's really hard to believe, but I mean, he was so perfectly cast in that movie, and it really makes me respect, you know, Paul Thomas Anderson's ability to cast in that movie, because he got something out of Burt Reynolds that probably a lot of people didn't realize he had in him, because it was a little bit different character for him, and obviously he was older. He couldn't just rely on his sex appeal. Sure. Although, I mean, I'm sure to people of a certain age, he still had plenty of sex appeal in that movie.
No doubt.
Considering the subject matter anyway. And, you know, the same thing with Mark Wahlberg in that movie, who, you know, I don't think anyone would say he's a great actor, but he was amazing in that role.
Absolutely.
Because he was so perfectly cast.
Again, his best performance.
Yeah, and there's that shot right at the end of Boogie Nights, that's that long tracking shot of Burt Reynolds just walking through his property, outside, walking into the house, I think out to the pool. I'm sure they did 100 takes on it. Right. And that just really, I think, encapsulated his character from that movie perfectly. Like, he's living in this sort of fantasy world that he worked hard to create himself. Right. And he seemed like he could hardly believe that he lived in it himself anyway. Right. And I always liked that about that character, and that was just a perfect symbiotic relationship between actor and director and all the filmmakers, that it's just one of those things where, you know, sometimes it all comes together: the acting, the writing, the direction, the set design, the costumes. Sometimes all that stuff is just perfectly aligned, and I don't think there's ever been a perfect movie, honestly, but it's one of those that I throw into that pile where all the elements just came together to make as close to a perfect movie as possible. Yeah,
I agree with that completely. And his casting, I thought, also added an anchor to the 70s. You know, that movie takes place in the 70s, and here you've got this guy who was the biggest player in the industry at the time. Right. I like that. Like, there's a true sense of that film embracing its roots, embracing the time frame that it's trying to tell a story from. And then, you know, you've got Burt Reynolds being able to play a role that he never would have been given in the 70s. Sure. And I don't know, it just, that, like you said, symbiosis a bit earlier, and I just think that's another perfect example of it from that film. Yeah, so that was probably my favorite movie of his, and certainly one of the favorite roles. But both Smokey and the Bandit, the Smokey and the Bandit films and the Cannonball Run and all, I mean, those are just, that's just such nostalgia from my childhood. And I mean, I think, you know, those, at least probably the originals, deserve a rewatch. And now that I think that happens a lot with a lot of people when a famous actor dies. You feel like, oh, like I need to go back and revisit some of his filmography. And which I did, honestly. I went back and rewatched Smokey and the Bandit as a result of hearing that he had passed away. Well, I mean, I think it's appropriate if you want to talk about that film a little bit. It's a good time to do it. Sure, absolutely. And it's a great movie. You know, if anyone remembers anything from that film, what they probably remember is, of course, the car. Sure. Right, the famous black Trans Am that he races around in. Yep. But the other also memorable thing from that film is the interaction between him and Sally Field. This was the first movie that they worked on together. They went on to do 3 more films together and were in a relationship. I am possibly married for 5 years throughout that period as well. And I mean, the chemistry between them is just, it's so fantastic. It's so easygoing. They bounce off each other really, really well. Mm-hmm. There are a couple of really great moments for Sally Field too, which, looking at it in hindsight, kind of makes that movie a bit ahead of its time. You know, there's like early on, like not even late in the film as like a pivotal moment, but fairly early on in the movie, she ends up getting behind the wheel of the car, saving his butt in the process. And then, you know, there's this ongoing gag where he keeps trying to get back behind the wheel of the car, but because they're time is so critical to it, they can't pull over to let that happen. So he's like, they're trying to do the thing where they swap seats while the car is moving, and it keeps not working out.
Yeah.
And it's a great little punchline. But in addition to that, what it's also doing is it's giving Sally Field more and more time during this movie to be the one in charge, to be the one who's driving the car, who's doing the stunts. And I just found all of that like surprisingly not what you would expect from the 1970s.
Yeah. Do you have any memory at all from the two sequels?
I do not, honestly. I know I've seen the second one. I don't know that I've ever seen the third one. Is Burt Reynolds even in the third one?
Yeah, he's in the third one.
Okay.
I don't remember now. This is one of those things where I'm just going off of memory, which is always historically bad on this show. But I remember a scene also from, I think it was one of those movies where there's another car involved in a car chase, and I think the car's red, and they sort of escape the cops briefly and go into a parking lot, and they have guys set up to spray the car down, and it washes the red paint away and turns white.
Yes.
And then like they make their escape, but I can't recall which of if it was one of the Smokey movies or if it was one of the Cannonball movies. There were multiple Cannonball movies, right?
Yes, there were.
Yeah. Again, I need to go back and check out at least the originals of both of those, but I'm sure the Cannonball movies wouldn't hold up nearly as well as Smokey and the Bandit does, the original anyway.
I suspect you might be right about that.
Yeah, I'm sure that those are just all slapsticky and shit. Also, I'd completely forgotten that he played Boss Hogg in the Dukes of Hazzard movie from 2005 or whatever.
Whoa.
Yeah. Maybe you never saw it. I saw it. I have no memory of it, but they made that, that remake of...
Yeah, and I did see it, and all I remember from that remake, honestly, is that every time Willie Nelson was on screen as Uncle Jesse, there was a pot joke. It just was so belabored and kept going and going.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting because it's very similar to the 70s feel of Smokey and the Bandit. You had, the Dukes of Hazzard, which was that sort of running from the law, fast cars, big jumps, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know that I can think of another actor who is as tied to the South as Burt Reynolds is. I mean, when you think about it, all of his roles take place in the South. Certainly all those movies that we've discussed just now. And then also famously, he was the lead on the TV sitcom Evening Shade. It was also set in the South. It was a big hit it must have run for 7-8 years, I would guess.
Yeah, I bet you're right. As a lead, anyway, obviously, character actors, there's, I'm sure, a bunch of guys who are always playing that same role as the
because they
Southern
have the accent.
Gentleman. Yeah. Right. But for a lead, I'm struggling to think of anyone that has that sort of same tie-in. That's interesting thought. So I'm trying to think of some of the other roles he's been. I mean, recently there hadn't been a whole lot to pick and choose from, but he's been working steadily. I was checking out his filmography. He's he hasn't done a lot of big stuff recently, but he's still been working.
Well, we should probably chime in and point out that he was slated to appear in Quentin Tarantino's new film.
Yeah. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, about the Manson murders. Right,
and so that film is about to enter principal photography. I don't know if they've actually done any shooting yet. Unfortunately, Burt Reynolds had not shot any of his scenes, so
that's too bad.
We won't get one final performance from him. But that would have been amazing. Burt Reynolds in a Quentin Tarantino film, I mean, that's like a match made in heaven. Yeah, that would have been a great swan song, but... It just wasn't meant to be, unfortunately. So I guess this is a good time to go through some of these roles that apparently he turned down during his career. So this is from this is from Variety magazine, famous Hollywood source, and I'm just gonna literally read to you some of the paragraphs, some of the language under some of the roles that he turned down. I think the most notable of all is apparently, he turned down the role of James Bond. Variety says, one of his biggest regrets was not playing James Bond. His excuse was that the public wouldn't accept an American playing 007. He was right about that. Yeah, and he said this to the producer who offered him the role after Sean Connery retired. It was a stupid thing to say, Reynolds told USA Today in 2015. I could have done it, and I could have done it well. The only thing, of course, this was way back when he turned it down, but now we've seen, a British guy play Batman. We've seen a British guy play Superman. Right. The Walking Dead, who has like an iconic TV character, is played by a British guy who's supposed to be from the South. I mean, and technically, at one point, an Australian played James Bond, George Lazenby. So yeah, that's true. So, but yeah, obviously his nationality is highly tied to that character. So he's probably right. That would not have gone over well then. Nowadays, I think it would be
a little bit more acceptable for, not for Burt Reynolds to play him, but for an American actor. But I just found that pretty interesting. So that's one of the biggest. There's some iconic roles on this list. I mean,
didn't he famously turn down Han Solo?
He turned down Han Solo. We'll get to that one for sure. He turned down apparently the role of Michael Corleone in The Godfather.
Wow, that would have been a very different film.
Reynolds turned down the role of Michael Corleone in The Godfather, but this one he did not regret. In an interview, he said he acknowledged the rumor that Marlon Brando threatened to quit if Burt Reynolds came on board. Burt Reynolds said, "I was flattered that Brando was so upset." On Han Solo, he says, "I just didn't want to play that kind of role at that time. The role eventually obviously went to Harrison Ford. Now I regret it. I wish I would have done it." Obviously it's Harrison Ford. It's hard to imagine anyone else, but I don't... Assuming that that the director, like Lucas, could have gotten Burt Reynolds away from sort of being Burt Reynolds in the character,
right,
even though it sort of fits the Han Solo character.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
But some of those like affectations that he always does in his movies, if he could have got him to tone that down, and it's George Lucas, so he couldn't have. I'm just going to say that right now. But I actually could have seen that working, but obviously it worked out for the best. I mean,
yeah,
you can't replace Harrison Ford with anything.
Absolutely.
Richard Gere's role in Pretty Woman, he says, if there was a pretty leading lady, I would do it no matter how bad the part was. He turned it down. Why? Because I'm an idiot, he said. All right, fair enough. Another big role, he turned down apparently the lead role in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
I could see that. Like
that went to
the
Jack
timing syncs up just right on that.
Yep. He apparently he desperately wanted to play it, but he still turned it down because I guess it says here that Jack Nicholson was already involved in the project, and he says you can't outdrink Jack and you can't outsmoke him either. I don't know if why that's a reason to not take the role, but that's part of the...
I would like to have been at one of the parties where those two tried, though. That would have been the height of 70s entertainment.
Here's one that I'd never heard of. Bruce Willis's role in Die Hard.
I can't see that.
No, I can't either. He said, and he acknowledged that this is another one that he turned down. So some of these actually have quotes from Reynolds. So, I mean, yeah, that certainly legitimizes the rumor. You
know what's interesting about that thought is that, and this goes back to how we were saying earlier, that Burt Reynolds kind of plays Burt Reynolds. I think what happens occasionally is an actor hits a role at just the right moment. It clicks perfectly. And then that sort of cements the performance that anyone wants from that actor going forward. Mm-hmm. You know, Burt Reynolds came along, did Smokey and the Bandit. It just clicked, and it was suddenly Burt Reynolds was playing the version of him that he played in Smokey and the Bandit for the next 10 years. And I feel like the same thing sort of happened to Bruce when he did Die Hard. Like, the version of Bruce Willis that you get in Die Hard is sort of the version of Bruce Willis that we've seen for the rest of his career, with a couple of huge exceptions. But I don't know. I just think that it's interesting that that could have gone the other way.
Yeah, and here's just a quick hit list of ones that Variety didn't really source or get a quote on, but just sort of a reported list of other turndowns in his career. Lead role in Rosemary's Baby. I assume the lead role in the Batman TV series. How different would things be with Burt Reynolds? I assume it was as Batman. I can't even wrap my mind around that. I mean, you're taking his mustache away if he's wearing the cowl. Well, that was before he grew the infamous mustache. That's true. That's true. A role, it doesn't say which one in the TV series MASH. Huh. Or, I'm sorry, it doesn't actually mention whether it's the TV series or the movie. A role in Rocky. I don't know if that's one of those things where Stallone was sort of thinking maybe I won't play the lead, and they were thinking about doing, I don't know. That's another one that you can't imagine anyone else. And I saved this one for last just because it's close to me personally. Apparently he turned down a role in Taxi Driver. So it really makes me wonder, was it, I can't imagine it was the De Niro character because Scorsese and De Niro had already been working together at that point. Yeah, absolutely. So maybe like Harvey Keitel's character, or I don't know, Albert Brooks's character. No, I don't know. I'd be really curious to find out which role that was because I love that movie Taxi Driver so much. At that point when that film was made, Burt was a big enough star that I can't imagine any role that wasn't the starring role. Would be anything that would be offered to him. Which is probably why it's more rumor than anything else. Right. Yeah. Yeah. just interesting to talk about. It's that discussion always makes me think of my favorite example of all time of this guy turned down that role, which of course is the other mustache guy, Tom Selleck, turning down the role of Indiana Jones, which I don't even know if I would like movies if that had happened.
Right. That's such a bizarre thing to think about. And you know what? As long as we're talking about this sort of thing, maybe as a footnote, if people are so inclined, they could go out onto YouTube and find the SNL skit where Norm Macdonald plays Burt Reynolds doing a screen test for the Han Solo role. It's maybe the best thing Norm Macdonald ever did on SNL.
Yes, his Burt Reynolds impression in that and his Celebrity Jeopardy Burt Reynolds stuff was fantastic.
It absolutely was.
I'm sure Norm was especially hurt to see that news.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, we're gonna get into some development news. This is an interesting one, and by interesting, I mean probably not great. They are making yet another Die Hard movie. It's been a while since we've seen a good Die Hard movie.
It's been a real long time since we've seen a good one.
Maybe since 1989?
Maybe.
So Die Hard 6 apparently will be titled McClane, and it is a John McClane origin story. It will apparently bounce between the 60-year-old Bruce Willis playing John McClane and some version of him in his 20s in a role that I do not believe has been cast yet. So whoever's going to play the 20-something version of him, at least as of the time of this recording, has not been cast. So, I mean, the Die Hard series obviously went off a cliff a long time ago. So, and I mean, this premise doesn't really make me want to jump back in. I mean, every time one of them comes out, I think, oh, well, Bruce Willis reprising that role will be fun. And then it's just kind of bad every time. So how do you feel about this whole mishmash?
Well, so the Die Hard movies they're an interesting clinic on Hollywood action movies in that they keep trying to make them whatever the current trend in action movies are. And unfortunately, that just takes it further and further and further away from what was good about the original film.
Right.
You know, now they're just a circus of Michael Bay level explosions and nonsense. And
yeah.
Anyway, so the latest movie, obviously it sounds a bit like this might be their plan to swan song Bruce Willis from the McClane character and introduce a new actor to keep moving it forward. I guess John McClane is going to be the new James Bond in that regard. And that's fine. I'm okay with that. I haven't really enjoyed the last several Die Hard movies. I don't even know that I ever saw the last one that was made.
Me either.
I doubt seriously I'll even see this one. I mean, barring the decision on who the young version of him is. I wonder, though, would there be... I hate to even put this out there, but with them famously taking Samuel L. Jackson in the new Captain Marvel movie and digitally de-aging him to a mid-1990s Samuel L. Jackson, I wonder if they gave any consideration to doing that with Bruce Willis, just letting him play the young version of McClane and then going in and making him look young.
Yeah. I'm curious what the cost of that is, if that's just going to become a regular thing.
Yeah, I mean...
How much that impacts the bottom line of each movie that does that.
Right, and that opens up the specter of those Marvel movies keeping the same cast they have now for the next 20 years.
Yeah, that can't be anything but a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's something I want. Also, I guess we should also bring up the fact that I'm sure every other movie geek in the world has already brought up, but... the movie Looper kind of showed us an actor who could play a young Bruce Willis convincingly.
Was that Joseph Gordon-Levitt?
Yes.
Yeah.
You remember they gave him a thinned out hairpiece and a weird nose prosthetic to look a little bit more like Bruce Willis. And
yeah.
He did a great job of kind of capturing some of his mannerisms.
His affectations, yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of surprised me too.
Yeah, it really did. But I could never get past the nose. It was just distracting the whole time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I think I would feel more strongly for or against these later Die Hard movies if I had enjoyed any of them at all besides the first one.
Right.
You know, like I'm just gonna make a quick comparison here. Indiana Jones. Legendary first movie. The second one, let's be honest, like as a kid, yeah, they're fun to watch. It's indie, but they're not. The second, Temple of Doom is not a great movie. Okay, right. Super fun. The third one, I love it because of the interaction between Sean Connery and Harrison Ford. And I mean, it's not a great movie, but I really enjoyed the third one just for that fun.
It's a lot of fun, yeah.
So sort of the same with Die Hard. Like Die Hard, first movie is maybe the greatest action movie of all time. The second movie was terrible. There's no way around it. The third movie also wasn't great, but it was kind of fun to have the interaction between the Sam Jackson and I think that was the third one, right? I hope it's the third one because I'm already committing to this. Yeah. So it was that made that movie fun and memorable, but because of those two characters. But since that third one, it's just been a series of completely unenjoyable. Like I don't even know how many there have been. I checked out after the one that had Justin Long in it. Nothing against Justin Long, but that movie was just so stupid.
Right.
I don't know how else to put it. It was so dumb that I just couldn't do it anymore. So I don't know how many there's been since then. One or two. Haven't seen them.
So I know I saw the one with Justin Long. Was that the one that was also took place in Russia?
I don't know.
I can't remember if that was the same one or if there was another one that came after that had this big chunk of it set in Moscow or whatever. Because I also saw that one, and I feel like there's been one more since that.
Yeah.
One. Ah, God, I can't. Anyway, basically for me, I remember the first one, I remember the second one, and then I remember Samuel L. Jackson from the third one, but basically the third one, the fourth one, and the fifth one all just sort of mixed together as a mess of like action movies that have literally no connection to the original Die Hard. The McClane character is not written the same. He's now he's a superhero. He's bulletproof, and in the first movie, literally broken glass thwarts him. Like that's an issue he has to deal with. Brilliant
screenplay.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely need to do a deep dive into Die Hard because you mentioned that it might arguably be the best action movie. I would say it probably is arguably the best action movie.
Yeah, I think the only thing we would get into there is genre. Like if we're arguing that Indiana Jones the Raiders is adventure,
sure,
then I put Die Hard probably at the top of my list. But yes, we will commit now to sort of fight the negative feelings of this new movie. Maybe when it comes up for release, we'll do a deep dive on the original.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah. All right. So I guess the more relevant movie news now. Also, the Avengers 4 film that's coming out next year. They are now presently doing what the article termed as reshoots and shooting the ending. They're doing this, I guess, because they want to thwart any chance of spoilers getting out there. I think you have a little bit more knowledge on this than I do, so I'll just turn that over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, no one knows for sure. Obviously, Marvel is notoriously tight-lipped on everything. But kind of the wild speculation going on right now is that they never shot the finale of the next Avengers film in an effort to avoid spoilers. So they're actually going back now and shooting the actual end of the film. And if that's the case, and they wanted to keep all of that as much a secret as possible, because I mean, those films have a giant cast and actors are notoriously terrible at keeping secrets. They're just horrible at it.
Get them on a talk show.
Yeah, absolutely. And they
shouldn't say anything, but...
Right. They all think they're super clever about it, but they're not. They're terrible about it.
Somehow Jimmy Fallon plies them with charm.
Weasels it out of them by simply asking them, will you tell me how the movie ends? Well, I shouldn't, but I die.
Yes, and they just walk out and they must be like, what just happened to me? How did Jimmy Fallon do that to me, that clown?
Well, I'm sure they walk out with no clue that they revealed anything, and it's not till they're driving away from the studio that they get the call from some studio executive who's just like, what the hell are you doing?
I think we'll refer to it as the Fallon roofie job.
But yeah, so with that being said, if in fact there was no finale shot, they're going back and filming that now. Obviously, there would have been breadcrumbs in the film leading up to whatever the conclusion of it is.
Sure.
So I think it's possible that the additional reshoots outside of the actual finale are to go back and reshoot the breadcrumb scenes so they actually mesh with what the end of the film is.
Yeah, because you'd brought up... off air, I guess. I don't know how to term that for a podcast, but you'd brought up that, and I didn't realize this, that they actually shot all of the characters being, spoilers, folks. They actually shot all of the, spoilers for Infinity War, which you've already seen, not for Avengers 4.
Yes.
I want to be careful here. That they actually shot all the characters being dusted in Infinity War.
Right.
I did not know that.
And then they went back and actually just edited into the film the characters that they wanted to die when Thanos snapped his fingers.
I can't believe because of Jimmy Fallon
Right.
Marvel Studios spent millions of dollars
Yes.
and thousands of man hours to shoot everyone dying just to keep the actors from releasing something as a spoiler.
Man, I can't remember the specific thing he revealed, but Tom Holland, who plays Spider-Man, famously revealed some critical spoiler while doing press for, I don't remember now if it was the Captain America film that he popped up in, or if it was the first Amazing Spider-Man film. Or no, I guess the Amazing Spider-Man films are the second reboot. Tom Holland is in the third reboot of Spider-Man, and they've just gone back to calling him Spider-Man again. Anyway, I don't remember the details of it, but Tom Holland has good fun with that constantly. Like whenever he makes a convention appearance or whatever, and somebody's like asks him a question about like what's coming up in the new movie or whatever, he's like, they won't tell me anymore. He's like, I screwed up once, and now I don't get the whole scripts to anything. I just get my scenes. I don't ever get to see the final cut of the movie until I'm on the red carpet to see the premiere.
They need to put it in his contract.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like dock his pay or something.
Well, I just love the fact that, he gets it and he can laugh it off and everybody has a good time with it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Some more development news. We touched a couple of weeks back on the next Star Trek movie that was supposed to star Chris Pine and Chris Hemsworth, not the Tarantino Star Trek movie. And there's a salary dispute. Still don't really know what the details of that were, if Paramount pulled away their original offer, which is one thing I read, and another thing I read, which was just the two Chris's saying, hey, we are huge, so we deserve more money for this. Don't know which one that is. Apparently, though, Chris Pine still expects to be in the movie. He's just sort of waiting on Paramount to, I guess, make the next move. So that's good news that it's not dead.
Absolutely. And I mean, it sounds like, if you're a major actor and you just put that out there, it must be because you and your team are pretty confident that it is going to come together.
Yeah.
I'm sure his agent is still working with Paramount trying to bang out the deal, and he's just waiting for it to happen.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah, it makes no sense for him to want to walk away from that. He gets to play this iconic character.
Sure.
It's huge for his career. All of that. Along those same lines, for those keeping track at home, there's also, as you mentioned earlier, a second Star Trek film percolating in the background to be written and directed by Quentin Tarantino.
Yep.
I noticed, I guess last week or something, Quentin in an interview where somebody asked him about it, still implied that was moving forward as well, and added that he would like it to be an R-rated Star Trek film.
I did see that, actually, yeah.
At any point in the past, I would have said that would never happen because that is the antithesis of what Star Trek is about.
Yeah.
But we live in a new era, and honestly, it would not surprise me if Paramount didn't jump on the opportunity that would bring up in terms of just PR material.
Sure, and I'm interested to find out, too, because Tarantino, obviously always R-rated because of language and because of violence. So is the idea with Star Trek being rated R, in his mind, Star Trek has always been bloodless. There's been violence, but it's pretty much been bloodless. It has never been gory.
No.
So I'm curious if Quentin wants to continue the spirit of Star Trek in that sense, but he wants to have the language, or if he wants both, or if he just wants carte blanche to do his thing. Because he has to understand, I think, that as thrilled as I'm sure Paramount would be to have him direct something from the franchise, I think he also has to understand that there is going to be some part of the franchise that he's going to have to keep intact. Not just, the obvious setting and the characters, but there's a certain feel to those movies, which I'm sure in his movie would be completely different. But there's no way they're just going to be throwing F-bombs. There's no way that there's just going to be blood splattered everywhere. So I'm really curious, when he wants an R rating, exactly what it is he has in mind. Yeah,
I have a difficult time even imagining what this film would be like, because Tarantino's signature filmmaking style is sort of like a winking, knowing film. Like, it's like everyone in the film, and then of course he as a director, you feel like they're all on the side of the audience.
Yeah, it's very meta.
Yeah, they really are. And obviously Star Trek has never been like that. And I don't know that you can do a science fiction film that way, because science fiction is always teetering on the brink of just collapsing in on itself as, pure fantasy.
In your readings, limited information in what you've read on Tarantino's desire to do a Trek movie, do you have any idea if he wants to do it with the principal characters from Trek? Like if he wants like a Kirk movie, or is it just going to, because I almost feel like it needs to be, not needs to be, but I almost feel like to do this in such to do it in the mind of Tarantino, it's almost like it needs to be sort of a crew that we don't know already.
Right.
But then you're taking away what makes it Star Trek.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, does he want to do, Chris Pine as Kirk Star Trek movie? Does he want to do like just a total one-off where he recasts Kirk? Or a totally different crew that no one's ever heard about, like almost like a fan fiction thing out of nowhere?
Yeah, well, when it was first announced, it was quickly followed up by the notation that his script was in fact meant for the current cast, Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, etc. I have not heard any discussion of that since. So whether or not that's true or just early Hollywood rumoring as things develop in the early days, I can't say for sure.
Super interesting though. I'm so curious to see what that would look like, and I was glad to see last week when that news came out that that's still a thing that's being kicked around.
It's so wild and unlikely that I still think that there's a less than 2% chance that it happens.
Yeah.
But you got to admit, it's the most interesting thing to happen to Star Trek in decades.
Yeah. And Tarantino himself has all of a sudden started kicking out movies at a little bit better clip than he used to.
Yeah.
So my hope is that if he actually wants to do this, that he'll go right from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and then aggressively try to get this thing made and not wait 6 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's hope.
Yeah, I'm just so I have so many questions, which is exactly I guess what you want when this sort of announcement gets made. Like I'm so curious. Like I said, it almost has like a fan fiction feel to it. Like, I'm Quentin Tarantino. I'm going to do this how I want. It can exist outside the realm of the rest of the Star Trek universe. Even if it's the same characters, I don't care. I just want to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you're talking about, well, and already we've spent way too much time talking about this particular topic, but
no, I think it's interesting.
There's definitely a splintering going on of the Star Trek property. You've got the films that are happening and completely unrelated to them. You've got this series on CBS All Access that nobody's ever watched because it's on CBS All Access.
Right.
And now you're talking about a Quentin Tarantino version of Star Trek that may or may not have a completely different cast.
Yeah.
I mean, how thin can you spread this property?
It's like we talked about before. We were sort of excited but surprised about the Patrick Stewart series because when we're not hearing that the current series is wildly successful, how much of an appetite can there possibly be
right
when the current series isn't super anticipated or hasn't been watched heavily? Plus all the news about the next Star Trek movie with Chris Pine, the non-Tarantino one, I mean, I wouldn't say there's like a palpable excitement about that.
No, I don't think so.
The excitement is really just from, I think, people like us who already like the movies and are excited to see them come out.
Sure.
So all of a sudden, like you said, now there's all these coming up on the menu, and now they throw in this Tarantino thing. I'm glad that Paramount is trying new things like that. The best news of all this, I think, is Paramount saying, you know what? Let's just not do the stale thing. So what if we're going to parallel develop 2 series? Right. So what if we're going to parallel develop 2 movies that don't exactly exist in the same universe with the traditional Star Trek 4 and the Tarantino Star Trek movie? I mean, I love that they're doing that. I just feel like if the Patrick Stewart one clearly is definitely going to happen, it's going forward.
Right.
It's inevitable that the Chris Pine non-Tarantino one's going to happen. So I'm afraid that the Tarantino one might be the one that just sort of gets just evaporates and never comes to fruition.
Right, especially as it already feels like the most unlikely of them all.
Yeah. All right, so weird change here. We're going to talk a little bit about a TV show that's being developed from a video game that was developed from a series of novels. I don't know if you ever played any of the Witcher series.
I have not.
Yeah, I have. I played the latest one, The Witcher, I think it was 3. One of the most immersive and fun open world video game experiences ever. I'm not a big gamer. I'm a casual gamer. So I don't know shit about video games. Like it's not my thing, but I so much enjoyed that game, and the character of Geralt of Rivia, the lead character in the game, is a pretty interesting character. Goes through a lot of different things. He's got a ton of history in his life because the third game picks up when he's much older, and a lot of stuff has already happened in his life leading up to that. I don't know what it is because I've only played the third one. But Netflix is developing a series based on The Witcher, which I just assumed was based on the video game. Come to find out, the series is actually going to be based more on the novels, which I didn't know existed. So
they're not adaptations of the game. They're novels just using the same characters in the same world.
Apparently so. Apparently there was scream at me on Twitter at TechBloodPod if I'm wrong here, but I believe they were novels first, then came the game. Because when I heard they were novels, I just assumed they were based on the game. But apparently I'm not right about that. So I don't know. If I'm wrong, please let me know out there.
And you're almost certainly wrong.
I'm almost certainly wrong. It's not the first time or the last. It's not even the last time on this podcast, on this episode. So Geralt of Rivia, super distinctive voice, super distinctive character. He's a little bit older. He's been cast as, he's going to be played by Henry Cavill.
Superman.
Yeah, Superman, and more recently, Mission Impossible villain.
Yes.
Who wasn't good.
Well,
I mean, it was the script, I think, more than it was the actor, but it was also the director not realizing, we need to do something different here. Anyway, that's a tangent for another time. So, I mean, I guess he's sort of at about the right age. If they're going to, again, I don't know what era of the Geralt character they're going to toss him in this show as, but he's kind of at the right age where he can play, he could play it at his age easily. If they needed to age him a little bit, it wouldn't have to be too dramatic and distracting if they wanted to do that. But it's an interesting world, and you don't see a lot of fantasy based TV shows. Obviously the Lord of the Rings one is coming up on Amazon, but you see sci-fi, or you see, I guess more like Game of Thrones in that era. But Game of Thrones sort of, well, at first they sort of lightly used all the supernatural stuff, and then it just kind of exploded, and it was constant dragons and magic and all that. At first, though, they used it so sparingly, and that really intrigued me. But anyway, The Witcher is definitely not that. It's all about, magic and all kinds of crazy, otherworldly stuff. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like when it comes out. I mean, you may not have any interest in it because you haven't played the game or anything, but I'm intrigued by it at least.
I'm actually really intrigued by it. I haven't played the games, but I love the fantasy setting as a storytelling device, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm certainly not really super interested in Amazon's Lord of the Rings series because I feel like I've already been there. I've done that. I don't need to see it again. Game of Thrones is wrapping up. I know there's going to be a prequel series, but as I've already explained, I hate prequels. They're meaningless and a waste of everyone's time. So this is sort of like something that could fill that gap for me. And I'm actually a big fan of Henry Cavill, I think. That's how I've always pronounced it.
Yeah, I think I was wrong there too. See, I was right. I was right, and then I was wrong.
I hope people at home are keeping score. So I'm kind of stoked about that. When he was cast as Superman, I think he sort of came out of nowhere for most people. But that's a big role, big budget franchise they built around him. And I think since then he's been working really, really hard to try to elevate his choice of roles and his place in the hierarchy of actors to, rise to the point of being the guy who can carry the mantle of Superman and the whole DC franchise universe. And, he hasn't had a huge amount of success until now, until Mission Impossible 6. I believe it's 6.
Sure.
I don't know. Where, as you say, maybe his performance isn't the greatest, but his physicality, I think, is exactly what that movie needed. It's so stunt heavy, and it's so Tom Cruise as Superman running around, being impervious to everything. And I think he just sort of lent this heavy brute force element in the middle of the film that they could just hammer against Tom Cruise constantly over the course of the film. So I really enjoyed it. It makes me like him. So to see him starring in another vehicle that might actually use him in a good way versus the Superman films, which I think he's a way better actor than they give him any opportunity to be in that role. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to see it. It actually makes me intrigued enough to maybe consider checking out the game.
Yeah, the game is a lot of fun, although you're going to have to build weapons and stuff, which I'm usually super turned off by in games.
Yeah. But
for whatever reason, that game just totally sucked me in, and it looks gorgeous on, a nice big TV on the, PS4. It's a fully immersive experience.
Yeah, I'm a lazy gamer.
Same, yeah. You just wait for someone to recommend something so highly. Yeah. And then you're like, okay, fine, I'll check this out.
Yeah, absolutely. There needs to be a setting in video games that's just lazy.
Right.
Right? Where you don't have to spend a bunch of time earning leveling up and building special weapons and all that kind of
potions.
stuff. Yeah, I just want to follow the storyline of the game from the beginning to the end
Right.
in an easy fashion where I can basically enjoy it like I would a movie.
Yeah. Well, the game's been out so long now that maybe there are cheat codes that will let you do that. So,
Or I can just watch a YouTube video where somebody plays the whole game in 90 minutes.
yeah, I think you would lose an interest in that quickly. But yeah, just to tie that up on Henry Cavill. Yeah, we've heavily criticized the DC movies before, but I think he was fine as Superman. It was just like you mentioned, sort of the material he was given that just didn't work out so well. Coming up, we're going to talk about toys, kind of, and sex offenders.
So another piece of news that came out just real recently is that the toy manufacturer Mattel, most famous for making Barbie dolls and He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, they're going to get into the film game. Apparently they were looking at some of that sweet, sweet money that Hasbro has made off of the Transformers franchise, and more recently Lego has made off their series of Lego movies, and they want a piece of that pie. I can't blame them. I mean, obviously we're living in an era where anything anyone has any sort of nostalgic fondness for can be adapted into a movie. I mean, they made a movie out of Battleship.
Right.
So
not a good one.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But still, you know, I don't blame them. They've got some hot properties. They, you know, like I said, they've got Barbie, they've got Hot Wheels. They've got a couple more recent things that I'm not familiar with, but the point is they have a pretty wide stable, and they're going to try to make some movies.
It feels like if they don't screw it up, that the Barbie thing could be huge.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously got to be the number one on their list.
For sure.
So apparently they had a production deal in place with Sony, and they had a couple of their properties set up, and for years they've had a series of false starts getting them up and running. One was a Barbie movie, one was a He-Man movie. But apparently just recently that deal with Sony, finally the contract expired, and Mattel just decided, hey, instead of going with a studio to do this for us, we'll just open our own film division and do it ourselves. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, with all those built-in audiences already there, just like I said, they just have to be careful with the way they do it. It's kind of an interesting thing when you think about a potential Barbie franchise, because there's a lot of negative things attached to Barbie too, about, you know, creating a poor image for women,
right?
For little girls, and all of that. But it's also at the same time, it's this iconic female quote unquote character,
right?
That in the when it first came up in the, I don't know, 50s, 60s, 70s was also a very positive thing for girls. And it's just one of those things where, you know, your opinion of Barbie and what it means can vary depending on who you talk to. You can talk to 10 people and get 10 different answers on it.
Sure.
And I guess I'll just throw in too there, you had actually recommended to me that Netflix show,
The Toys That Made Us.
The Toys That Made Us, the Barbie episode. We did actually watch that, and that was super intriguing. Like you said, it's got a little bit of everything.
Yeah, so if you haven't watched the documentary series on Netflix, The Toys That Made Us, and you're a film fan or whatever, it's worth it to watch the episode devoted to the history of the Barbie toy line. Because, I mean, I guarantee you that there are studio execs who saw that, and there's already someone somewhere working on the idea of adapting that into a full-length movie.
Mattel, there you go.
But yeah, I mean,
there's their first live-action movie.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously they want the toy line to be the thing, but I mean, the actual story behind it, I mean, it's got intrigue and crime and
you know, sex addiction.
Yeah, I mean, it's got everything in it. It's so fascinating.
Yeah. Yep. And then we also wanted to hit on some more unfortunate news. Weekly, it seems like this happens. There's and not just because I'm going to talk about The Predator again. That's unfortunate in its own right. But Shane Black's Predator movie once again hitting a snag. You want to fill us in on what happened with Olivia Munn?
Yeah, so Olivia Munn discovered that one of the co-stars on the film is a registered sex offender.
Stephen Wilder Striegel.
Yeah, so he's a friend of Shane Black. He was convicted of trying to lure a 14-year-old girl into a sexual relationship over the internet several years ago, and you know, he served his time. And like I said, he's buddies with Shane Black. So to help him out, Shane Black has given him small roles in a couple of his other films, and he did the same thing for him in this one. No one on the cast or with the studio knew anything about this actor's past.
But Shane Black did.
Yes. Olivia Munn shot the scene, in the past when they were filming the film. She recently figured out who this guy was, brought it to the attention of the studio execs. They dropped the hammer. They said, you got to cut this out of the film. This happened days before they were required to turn in a final cut of the film. So I don't know that anything new was shot. I think they just simply went in and surgically excised this guy from the film.
Yeah.
Right. And, Shane Black has been pretty upfront about it. He said, I was just trying to help a buddy out. Any blame on this falls on my shoulders. Just a distasteful black mark on a film that's already been plagued with so many bad things, so many bad rumors, so many reshoots. Advanced reviews of it have not been good. Just everything about it looks like it was a bit of a train wreck in the making.
Makes me wonder how Olivia Munn feels towards Shane Black. Like, it sounds like maybe she would feel like that was a bit of a betrayal to not tell anyone about that.
She had a very thoughtful comment where she said, I can't speak on behalf of Shane Black, but I feel that he would never put me in a situation where I would have been in any sort of danger. So at the very least, she's trying to keep everything friendly and political leading up to the release of the film.
Interesting. Yeah. Just another in a series of this problem that's just been plaguing. It plagues every portion of every working environment in America, but obviously most famously, in Hollywood right now. So
yeah, as long as we're talking about this, how do you feel about what Shane Black did there?
I feel like now it's not knowing the full context and all the details. You mentioned that the guy did do some time.
Yes.
When you said did his time, I don't know if that just means, he paid for it in the pocketbook or if he actually spent time in jail.
I want to say he went to jail for a year.
So he did some time. We don't know the details. So who
the point is he fulfilled whatever the social obligation that the court system's required of him.
Right. So, obviously everyone else can make their own judgment as to whether or not they feel like that's enough time and whether or not the guy should be able to make a living as an actor. Obviously he can make a living in anything. I'd say, I think it's a little skeezy on Shane's part not to at least share that with the cast, but I also feel like had he shared it with the cast, considering the current environment, there's no chance that anyone would have been okay with it.
Right.
So, it's a tough spot for him. It's hard to really make a judgment not knowing all the finer details of it. But if he did his time and the guy has a right to work, but yeah, I just feel like if you're going to put someone, especially I guess an actress in a scene with a guy, and obviously I have no idea what kind of scene it is.
Yeah.
I feel like I'd be pretty upset about that if I was Olivia Munn.
Yeah, weirdly, I believe the scene was he plays a guy who just kind of relentlessly hits on Olivia Munn and doesn't take the hint that she's not interested.
Yeah.
So that's awkward.
That's kind of weird.
Knowing that this would have been the third time that Black had done this for his friend, I see it from his point of view where he's like, well, I've already slipped this through 2 other times. No one knew about it. It was no big deal. So I get him thinking it would be no big deal this time. Obviously the people running the studio can't be happy about this. For those of us old enough to remember, there was a movie called Powder that came out several years ago that had a similar sort of controversy around it. And
Shot in the Woodlands.
Yeah, tanked that film. So, for good reason, this is a toxic element to inject into a film,
All right. Well, no trailers this week. We're going to try something a little bit different in our final segment, #Film Twitter. Final segment, #Film Twitter. This is literally where I went on Twitter using the Technicolor Blood Twitter account @TechBloodPod. Please hit us up and search the #Film Twitter. And someone on that hashtag posed the question, best movie fight scene. So we're going to kick that around this week. Now, I'm not really going to say this is the best. We're just going to each throw out one that is memorable that we like. We can go deeper on this in the future, maybe, or maybe when we talk about these actual movies we're going to mention, we can go deeper on them. But I'll start off. I'm hoping to throw one out that maybe not everyone has already seen. It's from a Korean film called Old Boy. You've probably heard of the Spike Lee directed American remake of it. Maybe you haven't seen the original. I'm off the top of my head, I'm blanking, but it's certainly in my top 10 all-time foreign films, and probably in my top 20 just movies in general. I love that movie.
It's such a great movie. It's
a revenge story. Like I love that genre, the revenge genre. Just I cannot recommend Old Boy enough if you haven't seen it. The original, I cannot recommend it highly enough. So there's a fight scene in Old Boy, and again, I don't want to give too much away because I want you to watch the movie. There's a scene in that movie that's this awesome this tracking shot that goes side to side in a long, narrow hallway, and it's one continuous shot, and it's just the lead fighting his way through a group of bad guys with a claw hammer, and it's so amazingly shot and just so stylistic and so hyper violent and so angry. You know, it's a great scene to encapsulate sort of the feel of that entire movie. And I mean, when I say it's a revenge movie, when you start watching the movie and you get the setup for it, trust me, you don't even know where it's going. Like, you think you know where it's going, and then when it gets where it goes, you're just left with your jaw hanging open. So that's the one I would mention off the bat, is the hammer fight scene in Old Boy.
All right, and I just want to point out that I just had this sprung on me, so I didn't really have a lot of time to think about this, and a lot of great options popped in my head right off the bat. You know, I'm not a huge fan of the Matrix movies, but I think, you know, from a technical standpoint, the crazy fight choreography for that film, you know, those would earn an honorable mention. I also immediately thought of the scene from the end of the original Predator film with Arnold Schwarzenegger fighting the Predator. We were just talking about The Predator coming out soon, so that was probably a top of mind. But the one I'm probably going to roll with as my suggestion is the final fight at the end of the very first Rocky film. For those of you who haven't seen that movie in a long time, or have maybe never seen it or whatever, like, this film is, I mean, it's such a great iconic sports story, such a great iconic underdog story about this guy coming from nothing to you know, have the championship fight where he's got like the whole city of Philadelphia backing him up and everything. I mean, it's a great story. And, you know, I don't want to give away spoilers or whatever, but whatever you think happens in that fight, that's not what happens in that fight. But it's filmed so well. It's just brutally violent.
Yes.
I mean, it really, you know, people talk a lot about the boxing in Raging Bull and what an incredible job Martin Scorsese did with it. And all of that's true to one degree or another. He does a lot of filmic things with that fight. You know, he plays with the timing of the film speed and a lot of stuff with sound. The Rocky fight it's less artistic and more just
visceral.
A camera trapped in the ring with these two guys trying to smash each other's faces into pulp, and it's just visceral.
I would say just boxing movies in general, and this includes Raging Bull and Rocky and really all of them. Boxing, even if you're a big fan of boxing and you appreciate the science of boxing, then you can also understand when I say it's exciting, but if you're looking for an exciting action element, it's kind of dull because it's usually just a bunch of guys like blocking each other.
Right.
And it's very rare that you actually have that exchange where they're just waylaying on each other. So the filmmakers in Rocky and Raging Bull and a lot of these other famous boxing movies, I think they do a great job of saying, okay, there's the realism of boxing and there's, let's make this an exciting fight for a movie without going, you know, too over the top with it. And I think Scorsese, especially with Raging Bull, does a great job because, like you said, it's camera tricks, camera elements, sound, just gorgeous, you know, iconic acting, all that. With Rocky, it was so brutal in a way that no boxing match ever really is, because if any of those punches connected in a real boxing match, the other guy goes to sleep immediately. It's just science. When you get hit on the button, you're going to sleep.
Right.
So, I mean, they're waylaying each other without playing any defense. So it's not really realistic, but they do a great job of saying, okay, are we making a movie that we want people to see and that's enjoyable and memorable, or are we making a documentary here? So they bridge the gap perfectly, and Rocky is a great example of that, where these guys are just killing each other. And it's so, like you said, the camera trapped in the ring, like you feel yourself clinching because you think you're going to get, you're going to catch some of this. You're going to catch
it's
a punch.
So claustrophobic.
Yeah, you're going to catch a punch, or you're going to get covered in sweat or blood or something.
Right.
So great choice. Can't not mention the fist fight scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Such a good
under the airplane. Yeah. Oh my God, that screenplay and that scene, just love that so much. But and honestly, I think either of us would be fine with that being our answer. But eventually, we're going to do a deep dive on Raiders, which is, I'm top 5 for both of us.
Oh,
easy,
yeah, no question.
Maybe even top 3. So we'll go deep on that at some point separately. But yeah, like you mentioned, The Matrix is a great one. I mean, there's just so many over the years. So just thought that would be a fun thing to try for the first time. I think we'll do that again sometime. That was a good little segment to close out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a good time.
So guys, check us out again on Twitter. It's @TechBloodPod. Hit us up. Any questions, anything you want us to talk about on the show, or you can search the hashtag Film Twitter, tag us on the tweet, and we'll talk about some of that stuff too. Appreciate you guys listening, and we'll do it again next week. Any closing thoughts, Terrence?
No, I don't think so. Everybody, thanks for listening, and if you can, go see a movie this weekend.
Yeah, there isn't much out there, but there's always something.
Yeah.
That Jurassic Park movie is still hanging around theaters. I might go finally see that in a quiet theater and then just come back and bitch about it.
I look forward to that.
That would be me. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you again next week.